It is Sunday the 28th of November 2021. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I'm just about to start up my protest against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy, some of which are local in terms of what the Unitarian Church of Montreal and its leaders and members have done. But my protest also addresses injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy in the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community, not just the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I'm a little bit later than normal today. I normally start at around 9:30 to 10-ish, finish up at around 11, but I was a little slow getting out of bed this morning. And I decided, oh, you know what the heck, I'll have some breakfast and then I'll go later, in terms of, maybe having a different public seeing the protest, people who pass the church at 11:30 to noon kind of thing, who might not pass earlier in the day, and also to have members of the church see the protest as they're exiting the church rather than, entering the church, which is the usual case. And of course, the protest is as much to reach the public as the members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. But nevertheless, I do want the Unitarians in Montreal to see the signs, as it were, and maybe one day get around to responding appropriately to the issues I'm raising. I will say that today is sort of an interesting date. As I said, 28th of November. So it's basically two issues at hand today. One is that I believe today, or possibly yesterday, is the day when the Canadian Unitarian Council will vote on whether or not to add an eighth principle to the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism that the Unitarian Universalist Association and, apparently the Canadian Unitarian Council ostensibly affirm and promote. However, their version of the 8th principle seems to have been watered down compared to the American one. They seem to have watered it down significantly. I expect that it will pass, because it's sort of a feel-good kind of thing, especially since it's been watered down. Quite a lot easier to pass when it's watered down. No worries, sir. So I fully expect that it will pass. I'd be a little surprised if it doesn't. Actually, one thing that I think could be an issue is maybe the more sort of hardcore people that were pushing for the 8th principle, they might not be happy that it was watered down. They may not be happy that specific language about addressing internal oppressions and so on was taken out of it. So it's possible that some of the people that were pushing hardest for it may not be happy with the current wording of the 8th principle. So we'll see what happens about that. Could be interesting. The other thing is, on the 25th of November, it was the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. And it's the beginning of 16 days of activism in terms of dealing with and preventing, ideally eliminating violence against women. And that's certainly an issue in terms of the sexual abuse in the Unitarian Universalist Church, sexual misconduct. Most of the victims of Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct, clergy sex abuse, some of which is pedophilia and rape of children even. The victims are women, and this is a form of violence against women. And so I am participating in that online. There's a hashtag 16 days, there's a hashtag IDEVAW, and so on. So there's hashtags associated with this 16 days of activism against, trying to at least address the issue of violence against women. And yeah, unfortunately, there's a certain amount of violence against women in the Unitarian Universalist religious community. I've been protesting against the mishandling and the cover-up and denial of clergy sexual abuse that includes pedophilia and rape since the late 1990s. Now that wasn't, jumping off my picket signs in the late 1990s, although there was certainly some allusions to it. But I just use the term clergy abuse and abuse of clergy and so on because, basically when you say clergy abuse of clergy, the first thing people think of is, sexual abuse in the church. So it wasn't really necessary to zero in on that. And I didn't want to zero in on that and limit it to that because I wanted to deal with non-sexual abuse as well. Because there's plenty of non-sexual abuse in the Unitarian Universalist religious community, various kinds of non-sexual abuse. So I was just talking about clergy abuse in general, but it certainly included pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, to say nothing of Unitarian Universalist religious educators and so on. So that's always been an issue. And the cover-up and the denial has been, I'd say, a very strong central issue now to my protest since 2012, when the Unitarian Universalist Association thought it would be a good idea to have the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors defamation lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, have me served with a cease and desist demand letter, which amongst other things falsely accused me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for blogging about pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers. The interesting thing is that at the time when I was served with this cease and desist demand letter, I had not actually blogged about pedophilia, i.e. sexual abuse of children, committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, although I was aware of some cases, but I hadn't actually blogged about them. But I did blog about the First Parish Norwell Unitarian Church in Massachusetts, Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's congregation. I had blogged about how Richard Buell had been charged, tried, and convicted of the rape of preteen girls. Girls who were no older than 12 years old at the time that the rapes took place, and could have been as young as 6 according to some estimates, certainly somewhere in the area between 9 and 12. Now, this makes Richard Buell a pedophile rapist. He raped preteen girls, prepubescent girls most likely. And that's essentially what pedophilia means. It means people who are sexually attracted to and sexually abuse children, prepubescent children. There's another word for those who, go after teenagers and so on. We might get around to using that word when we talk about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell. But in any case, that issue, the issue of Unitarian Universalist mishandling of cases of, all forms of sexual misconduct against women and men, but we're talking about specifically women in this issue in terms of the International Day to eliminate violence against women. Well, we'll stick with women, and they are by far the vast majority of the victims of Unitarian Universalist clergy misconduct, at least in terms of what we know about. I suspect that actually there's been a certain number of men and boys who have also been victims of Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct of one kind or another. There's certainly been a preteen boy who was raped, used essentially as a sex slave by a Unitarian Universalist religious educator. That case is not well known. It's not spoken about in Unitarian Universalist circles, but one Stephen Craig Bullite out in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, was a religious educator at an Oregon Unitarian Universalist church, and he adopted an 11-year-old boy and then proceeded to sexually abuse, rape, sodomize this preteen boy for a number of years. And then one day he took his computer in for repairs, and the computer repair people noticed, that there was these images, photos, videos of Stephen Craig Bullite sexually abusing young boys, not just the boy who he had adopted. And so he was arrested, charged, tried, convicted of a fair number of sex crimes, and actually had a fairly stiff sentence. I think he had a 18-year sentence or something, and I don't think there was any mitigation of that sentence. So that, again, it's slightly off the violence against women subject, but I just wanted to make it clear that just because Unitarian Universalists don't talk about sexual misconduct against men and boys by Unitarian Universalist ministers or Unitarian Universalist religious educators, etc., doesn't mean there isn't any. It just means they don't talk about it. It just means they're maybe more successful at keeping it hidden than the sexual abuse of women. So I just want to make that point. Just going to make sure my camera's still running. And it is, right around 12 minutes. So we're just circulating in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Not quite sure what time it is. I'm guessing it's probably around 11:45 or something like that. Maybe a little earlier. Let's just have a look at my timepiece and see what it says. 11:50. So I was pretty much right on the money. A little optimistic about what time it was. So it's coming up for noon. So I would expect Montreal Unitarians to start coming out of the church soon, because I would expect the service to be wrapped up, although they do stick around for coffee. But I suspect that starting in some minutes, people will start coming out and they'll see the signs. I'll make sure they see the signs. But in the meantime, we'll let the public see the signs. There's already been a certain number of people who have seen the signs. I will say it seems to be, okay, here's a bunch, but I was going to say that it seems to be fewer people at this hour than early in the morning, but I spoke a bit too soon because there's about half a dozen coming this way now. So anyhow, let's see, 7, 8. So they're seeing picket signs which say Unitarian Universalists misuse blasphemy law to cover up and deny pedophilia and rape. I definitely want that issue to be at the forefront of today's protest and most of my other ones, since the UUA falsely accused me of violating Canada's blasphemy law in an effort to conceal pedophilia and rape from the public. As I said, this goes back to 2012. It's almost been a decade now, heading towards a decade, since the Reverend Dr. Peter Beyond Belief Morales-led Unitarian Universalist Association did hire Stikeman Elliott, barristers and bullshitters, to accuse me of blasphemous libel, amongst other things. And I made it very, very clear at the within days of receiving that cease and desist demand letter in my email on Friday, June 1st, 2012, even before I'd happily gone to the bailiff's office to get the actual paper document a few weeks later, just on the basis of the email, I got back to Maître Marc-André Coulombe and top-level UUA leadership, you know, Reverend Dr. Peter Morales, probably Jeannie Corder, the moderator of the UUA Board of Trustees at the time, you know, maybe the whole Board of Trustees. I can't remember exactly who all my emails were CC'd to, but I certainly would have made sure that top-level UUA leadership were aware of my response to the UUA's false accusation. And I made it very clear. I said, you need to formally withdraw this false accusation. You need to publicly apologize for it. And you need to tell the truth about, you know, just how many Unitarian Universalist ministers, to say nothing of Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, are in fact guilty of committing such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. Because that was the exact wording of the letter. That's a phrase from the letter. The exact wording was, or very close to the exact wording was, your unfounded and vicious allegations to the effective ministers of the association engaged in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape are defamatory. And then it went on to say that, you know, these allegedly unfounded allegations were so defamatory that they constituted blasphemous libel, which was in the Canadian Criminal Code. So I actually looked up blasphemous libel and discovered, well, yes, sure enough, you know, Canada actually has an anti-blasphemy law in the Canadian Criminal Code. At least it did back in 2012. And the UUA was accusing me of violating that law, you know, basically threatening to have me prosecuted for blasphemous libel if I didn't take down the blog post that told the truth about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell and Richard Buell, because those were the only two pedophiles and or rapists that I had blogged about at the time. As I said, I knew of other cases, but I hadn't actually blogged about those other cases. I'd like to keep some things in reserve, you know, have some cards to play if necessary down the road a bit. Still have a bunch up my sleeve, as it were. So, you know, what I mean by that is that I want to be able to confront the Unitarian Universalist